Defense Department says this year will be the end of a more than 20-year journey to complete the audit process. The comptroller at the Pentagon, David Norquist, testified to the Senate Budget Committee it may be 10 years until the department can get a clean audit opinion. Peter Levine is Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for Defense Analyses and former DoD Undersecretary of Personnel and Readiness. Peter, thanks very much for coming on the program. It's great to have you here. What did you see when you were inside the department regarding the audit process?
If you've been working on the same project for 30 years and it doesn't look like you're any closer now than you were then, 30 years ago, then you have to look at it and think whether maybe you're going about it wrong. And I certainly saw that when I was there. The Department of Defense is a big ship and it doesn't change directions easily. I raised the issue, but I will say that I did not make much progress in changing the direction. The problem is not one of lack of effort. The department's had really good people working on this, working hard on it, taking the best advice they can get from GAO and from other experts for a long time, and I certainly include the current comptroller, David Norquist, in that. He's a good person. He's trying to do the right thing, but this project is not an easy project.
You write recently, the department has twice tried to solve the audit problem with grand design approaches, and you write about the Corporate Information Management Program and the Business Enterprise Architecture effort. Tell me about those and where you think they may have gone wrong.
They were both efforts to get on top of the problem by determining what the department's business needs were and designing out, so they could design an objective system and figure out how to get to where the department needed to go. And what the department discovered in each case was the business is too complex. They didn't have the capacity to design it from the ground up and develop an objective system. And they didn't have the patience to take the 5 to 10 years it would have taken just to get the design in place, let alone build it all the way out. So you saw, for example, in the early 2000s, we spent about 2 or 3 years just trying to map the existing systems of the department. And when we got done with that period, the map wasn't even complete. It's an immensely complex system. It's not like any other entity on Earth. It's not like another federal agency or corporate entity because we have so many different functional entities that do logistics and communications and buy and sell from each other and have complex interactions with each other. So it's more of an economy than it is of a single entity. It makes it a difficult problem.
I was reminded of, as I was reading your work, about an interview I did maybe 5 or 6 years ago with the gentleman who ran the physical refurbishment office in the Pentagon and essentially doing one of the segments of the Pentagon, and it was kind of an ongoing basis. By the time he finished with the 5th segment, the 1st segment was due for a refurb, and it strikes me that this is the same situation, isn't it? By the time you would map it, you get to the end, and it's different than when you started the mapping process.
John Hamre, when he was comptroller in the 1990s, had a saying that the problem with the defense audit is you're on the car driving at 60 miles an hour at the same time that you're trying to change the tires. I actually think it's more complicated than that because you're actually trying to replace the engine while you're driving at 60 miles an hour. It's an almost impossible task to conceive of because you have to keep running the operation at the same time that you're changing it.
You write in this piece, the department's business systems and processes are in better shape today than they were in the 1990s. That's good news.
That is.
How are they different, or how are they better today than they were?
So we have electronic exchange of data, so we don't have to individually input data, inconsistent data into different systems all over the place, so there's better reliability of data. We have new, more modern systems. For example, in the logistics area, I remember in the 1990s we had no idea what we had or where we had it, and so we didn't know whether when we ordered more we actually needed more. We now have what we call end-to-end visibility, asset visibility for the logistics system, so we can actually trace things that we have and know where we have them. The difference between the first Gulf War and when we went back, for example, we had the microchips on the containers, so we could tell what was inside the containers, and we knew what we had sent forward. So there are all these kinds of places where we have much better data today than we did before. We have much better systems than we did before. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean that we're a lot closer to an auditable system.
Toward the end of this piece, you write, DoD still has no good rationale for why it's trying to achieve a clean audit opinion on its financial statement. Now, the two that I came up with were Congress told them it had to do it. So I guess that's one.
That's one.
And not necessarily a good rationale, but it's a rationale. The other is one that Secretary Mattis has talked about, and that's accountability to taxpayers. Will taxpayers really have some sense of accountability about the Pentagon when an audit, whether it's clean or not, has been completed?
So I think that we need to distinguish between the audit and the financial statement. Audit is vital, and it will always be vital for accountability. The question is what you're going to audit. And it's the financial statement that doesn't have a particular value. Financial statements are used in the private sector to assess the value of the assets or the profitability of the institution. DoD isn't really judged by the value of its assets or whether it makes a profit in a year. It's judged by its ability to defend the national security interests of the United States. So we have a target in that financial statement that may not be the relevant target. So we need audit for accountability. The question is, are we auditing the right things?
30 seconds left. What are the right things that you want to see results when we finally see
So
body
I would want to
of work?
continue to audit systems and processes to make sure that those systems and processes are reliable, and I would certainly want to have complete auditability and accountability for expenditure of appropriations. From the time that the money is appropriated down to where it's expended, I think that we need to have an audit trail, and I think that that's essential to accountability to taxpayers. I'm just not convinced of the value of the financial statement.
Peter, thanks very much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.